Action.
Coming to you from Las Vegas, we are Vegas Real Estate Advisors. Denise Cesena.
I'm Michael. Nice
Michael
to see you guys again.
And we are going to talk about solar. A lot of questions about solar. And this man used to work in solar, so I'm going to have you take the floor.
So I know solar is a little bit of a complicated topic, or it seems more complicated than it really is. My background, in my 20s, I used to work for SolarCity as a regional manager, right when Tesla bought them out, right when the Model 3 was in its sort of like hype phase before it actually got released, back when the Powerwall was the newest thing. And I would say solar gets a little bit complicated, especially when it comes to buying or selling a house. Essentially, like, solar panels are an alternate way of getting energy. That's kind of like the gist of it. There typically were 3 ways of purchasing it. One, ownership, and the ownership route is further split into either buying it outright by writing a check, financing them, like taking out a loan like you would on a car, a mortgage, that sort of thing. There were 2 options where the solar company that installed the panels would actually own the hardware on your roof, and you just essentially buy the solar energy from them. So I would say, like, now that I've lived in Vegas for a little while, the more common version that you'll find on rooftops is what's called a PPA, or a power purchase agreement. Essentially what they do is they'll put the panels on your roof. You don't actually own them, and you purchase the electricity directly from the solar company at a cheaper rate than the typical electric company. So that's the gist. You just buy the same electricity from another source. The per unit rate is just cheaper.
Okay.
Another phrase that gets thrown around is a lease. Essentially what a lease is they will do the PPA but average it, so you have the same payment every month. So it's the lease and the PPA. Solar salespeople will tell you that they're different things, but I wouldn't necessarily say they're that different to where it's like worth noting, if that makes sense.
It does. I've actually gone to 4 different classes, learned about solar, and had a lot of one-on-one conversations with the guys who own these, especially with the maintenance and getting the pigeon guards and other things. So I talk deeply after classes to the specialists, and I've always been told if you have a power purchase agreement, it's better than a regular lease. Do you find that to be true?
I mean, I would say it depends on how good you are at budgeting.
And also, let me ask about how big the system is. Now, let's say you have a 5-bedroom home and you can put 40 panels on your roof, but some people say, nope, I only want to do 20 panels, or vice versa. You have a small house and then you put a ton of panels, as much as you can cover on your single story. And that's making so much that now you are just giving it back to the power company, and they're not running efficiently. So there are people that will say, if you fine tune the right amount of panels on the home and it's seamlessly given and taking, that it's not a lopsided agreement and usage from the power company and the solar, then it makes sense. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Is that kind of true?
Kind of. So I wouldn't recommend adding solar to your home until you've lived there for a year. The reason for that, every solar salesperson who comes to your house is going to ask you for a copy of your bill because they want your usage data. It's almost like if you're a W-2 employee and you're filing your taxes, you want it to get as close to neither a refund nor owing the government money as possible. So they will try to size your system in such a way that it offsets your bill, and they'll use the annual numbers. So some of the issues that causes, it's sized based on what you did last year. When I worked in solar, one of the big mistakes folks would make is they would get solar and then they would think, oh, I have infinity electricity, and they would just run their AC consistently, and then their usage the next year was substantially higher, and then they have their solar bill and an electric bill. So that's one of those things to account for. Another big one that folks would run into is if you plan on getting an EV, that uses a pretty substantial amount of electricity. So I maybe wouldn't get solar if you're expecting to get an EV in the future, because it's kind of hard to guesstimate that, how much electricity you're going to use. So I would have as much data as possible before looking into it. One thing I would say too, something that I know, like there's a lot of folks out there who are like, I need to own stuff. I don't lease cars. I don't do this. I don't do that. I'm curious to see what this does to the solar industry in 2026. So there used to be a pretty substantial tax credit that you could only get by purchasing cash or financing. You couldn't get them for a loan or a PPA,
right?
Or a lease or a PPA, excuse me. I would say, as someone who owns multiple properties across Vegas, that tax credit was one of the most maybe appealing things about solar. And now that it's gone away, I don't know if I'm necessarily motivated to add solar to properties that I have. I would say in 2026, because the tax credit went away, I think the option that makes the most sense for most people, just as someone who's like not necessarily in the industry anymore, but was in the industry for a substantial amount of time, is probably the PPA product. But I would put an asterisk with that. So typically solar companies, when it comes to a lease or a PPA, there's a clause in the contract that says the rate that they charge you goes up a certain percentage every year.
The acceleration clause.
Yeah. So what I would recommend, if you can, and I know they're out there, if you can find someone who sells a PPA without
I just sold one.
Without the accelerator clause,
Perfect.
I think that is actually
the best PPA out there.
That's what, if my house didn't come with solar on it when I purchased it, that's like what I would look into. But again, have a year of data, make sure your system's sized appropriately, and make sure in the contract that it doesn't have that accelerator clause.
And another little asterisk to that is the older systems are a little bit more locked into that lower rate. And most of those older ones did have that flat rate without an acceleration. The newer ones, as years went by, they were actually getting them a more aggressive acceleration clause and then not even locking them in at that power usage. So it's not even a more effective system. So if you're looking at a system that's 10 years old versus 3 years old, the 10-year one is normally better. Just obviously review the documents, but that's just something to keep in mind. I want to touch on warranties and when they transfer, and also transfer fees. So just give us an idea on that.
So one thing I would consider if you're looking to add solar to your home, I would go with a company that has a track record and is established. As someone who understands the P&L behind a solar business, it's very cash intensive. So you hear a lot of these horror stories about companies that have gone out of business. So I would like look for a company that's been around for a while and maybe has like more of a track record than like a mom and pop.
Right.
The panels themselves will have their own like warranties for the hardware. The inverters will have their own warranties, but the service warranty, which is the important one, where if something goes wrong, the company will come out and fix it. That's the warranty where you want to make sure that you have an established company. I would say like Sunrun and Tesla are two pretty good places to start. And I know solar salespeople will hate that I mentioned this because this is kind of an industry secret, but they want your business so much that there's a price matching that's on a per kilowatt basis. So you can go back and forth between multiple companies and get them to beat each other and beat each other and beat each other for a lower and lower and lower rate. It's time consuming and it's tedious, but that's what I would do.
Nice tip.
But it'll add a lot of, it's very time consuming, but like you could get a pretty substantial amount off if you are not afraid to negotiate.
Okay. Now what can you tell us about how long of a contract you should opt for?
It depends. I think PPAs and leases are typically 30 years. And then something else that's worth noting on leases and PPAs, as your system gets older, you actually can own the system if you wanted to. It's almost like leasing a car. You can buy things you can buy it at a depreciated value over time. So that is like something that maybe might make sense for you if you want a lower power bill, you want to add solar, you're like, I need to own my things, so do the one that makes financial sense now with the lower rate, and then maybe buy it when it makes sense to, because the depreciation schedule is typically pretty substantial.
Okay, good to know.
And one other thing, solar panels are just like any other electronic, they will lose efficiency over time. I would say the degradation on solar panels is not as substantial as like you might think.
Okay, good.
There aren't a lot of moving pieces. The technology hasn't, it's gotten better, but it hasn't changed substantially since its inception. You'll find like a lot of systems that are older, like still are pretty damn efficient.
Oh, good.
I would just maybe, if they get dusty, like spray them with a hose. But other than that, it's a pretty like low maintenance situation.
Right. Now I'm just going to touch on a few things just because when I was considering putting solar on my home, I was very much worried about holes in my roof and then leaking into my house. And being in the real estate business for many years, I have come across homes that I listed where there were 8 holes in the roof that flooded 8 parts of their house. And you get a little weary of, oh man, that solar system up there just caused a lot. That scared me. But again, that's not every case. What do you think the future of solar brings? Because in Las Vegas, everybody says we have hot weather, we have sun. It's just, a no-brainer. What do you think?
I will say the solar industry, a lot of their value proposition is highlighting a problem that maybe not necessarily everyone feels like is a real problem. So the reason why you'd want to go solar is not necessarily just the cheaper price, it's the locked-in price. NV energy goes up so many, I don't know, I'm not a solar salesperson anymore, so I don't know the percentage, but it goes up a certain amount every couple years. With solar, you can kind of lock in either a set price or a predictable price, and that's the real value proposition. So if you're looking to maybe streamline your like expenses, like then it could be a good option. But again, make sure you have at least a year of data. Make sure that like you've done your research. Make sure you're price matching. I will say I think that solar has its place in like Nevada, but I would say like maybe not as prominent without the tax credit. So I like do your own research, but I like think it would make sense if you're looking to justify your bills. But I don't know if I would necessarily justify purchasing a system like outright with cash or a loan unless you just, I don't know, have money to burn.
Okay. Now one
Literally
thing,
and figuratively.
both, right? Now one thing that I have to close with is the unknown surprise that I discovered that when I was so happy thinking I was going to get solar, that if the power went out and the grid goes down, that I was going to have power. And I was so disappointed when that sales rep sitting in my house told me that you cannot bypass NV energy and you cannot be off the grid. So no matter what, there's always energy going from your house to NV energy, and it's this roundabout. And so if the system and the grid goes down and we're at a blackout, you do too. That was the biggest surprise that I didn't expect. And that's why I said I opted out not to have solar, but I just wanted to end with that just in case maybe you did not know that. That's a big one to figure out before you buy it, to know that up front. So if you have any other questions, just call us, text, DM, click that like button. Hopefully you subscribe, and then we can continue our discussions. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
Later, you guys.